Hey, it's Maximo, and welcome to Maximo's Travels. Well, folks, sadly, my trip to Fraser Island, Gary, has come to an end. We check out of the hotel and make our way to the ferry for the trip back to the mainland. We pick up our car from River Heads and drive to Noosa Heads. There, we do a bit of shopping, have some lunch, and check out the famous Noosa Heads beach. Then we drive further south to Redcliffe. We're only there overnight, but we get to explore its beaches, cafes and restaurants. The Bee Gees were discovered in Redcliffe, Australia, and I discover a laneway that's a tribute to them. We all head to Brisbane Airport, where Joe and I fly back home to Melbourne, and Simon and Pauline fly to Adelaide. Join me. Sadly, it was our last day at Gary. It was time to check out of the resort at the Kingfisher Bay. It was a fabulous time that we spent here, and if you're interested in coming here, do check out the video review I did of the resort in one of my previous episodes. So we checked out of the resort, walked down to the jetty and had our final coffee at the Sunset Bar right on the water's edge. We waited around for a little bit to catch the ferry back to the mainland. And with the last look at the crystal clear waters and the sandy beaches of Fraser Island, it was time to farewell it. We walked to the end of the jetty and were able to see all the cars board the ship. And once all the cars boarded, it was the turn of the passengers to board it. This included a car that had clearly broken down. Imagine that, folks, breaking down in the middle of Gary and having to be towed all the way back to the jetty, onto the boat and back onto the mainland. I couldn't think of a worse thing that could happen to me on a trip. The Kingfisher Bay ferry took off as soon as all the passengers were on board. It was a beautiful day with very little wind. We had a smooth sailing back to the mainland at River Heads. It was a more pleasant journey back than the one that we made a couple of days before. It was an uneventful journey. We made it back to the secure car park, collected our car and headed off to our next destination, which was Noosa Heads. This was a journey of around 185 kilometres and took us around 2.5 hours to make. The journey was filled with many rivers. It was green, lush and subtropical. As is usual with Noosa, seeing as it's so popular, it was very difficult to find a car park. We drove around for quite some time before I was able to find a 2-hour parking spot. This gave us enough time to do a little bit of shopping, have some lunch and walk alongst the beach. Simon did a little bit of shopping at a motorcycle inspired boutique. We had some lunch, hamburgers at a fairly average hamburger place, and battled the heat and humidity. We had a brief walk along the very famous Noosa beach and then the heat and humidity as well as the car park timing had got to us. We walked back to the car and resumed our trip. We left Noosa and continued to travel south, around 117 kilometres in an hour and a half to our next destination, Redcliffe. If you've never heard of Redcliffe, here are the reasons I went. Firstly, it was only about 30 odd kilometres and half an hour from Redcliffe to Brisbane Airport, where we'd be catching flights the next day. Secondly, it's a seaside town that I've never been to. And thirdly, it's the birthplace of the Bee Gees. For those reasons, I wanted to check it out. Redcliffe is around 42 kilometres north of Brisbane. It's an old industrial town. It's got a unique mix of old 1940s and 1950s bungalows and single-storey buildings, as well as some quite new high-rises and multi-storey hotels and apartment complexes. It's a unique place to stay, and it's certainly an up-and-coming tourist destination. We found our accommodation quite easily. I'll do a separate review of this in an upcoming video.
One pair of pants later.
We checked into our accommodation, freshened up, had a change of clothes, and went out for a pre-dinner drink. It was around about 6 p.m. and it had already gotten quite dark. I think, as I've said in a previous video, there's no daylight savings in Queensland, so it gets dark quite early in summer. We stopped at a bar on Redcliffe Parade and had a couple of cleansing IPAs, ice cold and refreshing. We had dinner reservations at 7 p.m. at Lanterna Restaurant, which is a bit further on down the parade. It was quite a small Italian restaurant. We sat at the back in the garden area. The food was fantastic, really good vibe, and the owner was such a character. Fantastic place to come. The wine list had some really nice Italian wines on it, plenty of gluten-free and vegetarian options. I had a carbonara gnocchi, absolutely scrumptious, delicious.
I'm not selling the rice.
It's sort of a gluten-free gnocchi, very nice.
Was it good, yeah?
Joe ordered spinach and ricotta ravioli. They were big, juicy and scrumptious. Seeing the main meals were so great, we made room for dessert. I had a very crisp, gluten-free chocolate brownie that came with amaretto. Utterly fantastic, thoroughly enjoyed it.
You'll get permission for
The
filming.
milfolie.
And will we be sharing lanes, or did you want me to take
Milfoy.
No, it's milfolie on the menu.
Well, it's French.
I know, if it's...
1,000 leaves.
Yeah, but that's two.
Joe had a passion fruit meringue with some of the bits of the crispy fudge that I had. Utterly delicious. What a fantastic restaurant this has been. Fantastic find. I'll leave a link in the description. I would highly recommend anyone to come here.
The next day.
We went to bed reasonably early. I had a fantastic sleep and I woke up early. I decided to go for a long walk. It was around about 3 kilometres, and while I was out there, I had a spot of breakfast as well. got to the airport with oodles of time to spare. Joe and I were flying from Brisbane to Melbourne, while Simon and Pauline were flying from Brisbane to Adelaide in South Australia, where they'd spend a few days looking around Adelaide as well as Kangaroo Island. They were going to meet us back in Melbourne on their return. We were all flying Qantas today. We checked in with a minimum of weight or fuss, made our way through security in record time, and headed towards the departure area and waited for our respective flights. Pauline and Simon were to fly about an hour before Joe and I were. Brisbane Airport is quite new and modern as well as large. There's a wide selection of shops, restaurants, cafes and bars where one can eat, drink and make those last minute shops.